You know, between the 8th and 18th centuries, the Indian subcontinent went through a massive transformation. And it wasn't just about armies and emperors, it was a revolution of the heart and mind. We're going to dive into how this incredible period of change, fueled by faith and rebellion, is still shaping India today.
So, let me start by asking you this. What if the most powerful weapons for changing a society weren't swords, but songs? What if a whole revolution was led not by generals, but by poet saints who sang about a radical, personal love for God?
Well, that is pretty much exactly what happened. Between the 8th and 18th centuries, these amazing figures we now call poet saints lit a fire. They started movements that challenged the very foundations of the religious and social order. It was like they unleashed this new kind of cosmic energy, a spiritual fire that just swept across the subcontinent.
Now, to really get a handle on this revolution, we first need to understand the world it grew out of. And it was this incredibly complex and evolving mosaic of different beliefs and practices.
Okay, let's break down a really key idea, the great and little traditions. Think of the great traditions as like the official, mainstream religion of the elites, all written down in Sanskrit. But at the same time, you had 1,000 little traditions blooming all over the place. These were the local gods and goddesses that people worshipped in their own villages, with their own stories and rituals. And these two worlds, they were constantly talking to each other, mixing and mingling in fascinating ways.
And here is a perfect example of that dialogue in action. In a place called Puri, there was this local wooden deity that was worshipped by tribal communities. Well, over time, it was slowly embraced by the great tradition. By the 12th century, this local god was being worshipped as Jagannatha, who was seen as a form of the great god Vishnu. It's a classic story of a little tradition making it to the big time.
This slide really shows you the fundamental clash that was going on. On one side, you have the established Vedic tradition. It's super structured, focused on really precise rituals that only a few people could perform. But on the other side, you've got these new movements like Tantra and Bhakti, and they were basically breaking all the rules. For them, it was all about a direct emotional experience of God, not rigid ritual. They questioned the old texts, and maybe most radically of all, they said, hey, our doors are open to everyone, women, lower castes, anyone who wanted in.
And this brings us right to the heart of the movement, to the people who really lit the fuse for this spiritual explosion, the poet saints. So the first sparks of this revolution really flew from the south. Around the 6th century, you have these two groups of poet saints, the Alvars, who were devoted to Vishnu, and the Nayanars, who worshipped Shiva. And what did they do? They wandered from temple to temple, but they weren't preaching in complicated Sanskrit. They were singing these passionate, ecstatic hymns in Tamil, the language of the people, and their message of love and devotion just spread like wildfire.
And this quote from an Alvar saint who was actually a Brahmana himself is an absolute bombshell. He is saying straight up that Vishnu prefers a devotee from a so-called outcast background who has genuine love in their heart over a high-caste scholar who is just going through the motions. This was a direct attack on the caste system that had structured society for centuries.
So you see, this wasn't just some polite religious disagreement. This movement was a powerful critique of the entire social structure. It took aim at both caste and the strict rules that governed women's lives.
And the challenge to patriarchy was led by some truly remarkable women who simply refused to be silenced or pushed to the side.
Meet Karikal Ammayar. She was a woman who dared to defy all the patriarchal norms of her time. As a devotee of Shiva, she looked at the traditional roles of wife and mother and basically said, nope, not for me. Instead, she chose a life of extreme asceticism. Her very existence was an act of rebellion.
And just listen to how she described herself. She embraces the form of a demoness, completely rejecting all conventional ideas of what a woman should look like to adopt a form she felt was closer to her god, Shiva. I mean, this is an incredible rejection of society's rules, a total declaration of her spiritual independence.
These saints were always forcing people to ask themselves these really tough, uncomfortable questions, like this one. What actually matters? Is it the empty shell of a ritual, or is it the living, breathing reality of faith and compassion?
This razor-sharp critique comes from Basavana, a 12th century leader from Karnataka. He's just calling out the hypocrisy, right? He's saying, you pour milk on a stone snake, but if a real one shows up, you want to kill it? What's that about? His movement, the Virashaivas, challenged everything from Brahmanical rituals, the complex ceremonies led by priests, to the idea of caste purity. And their message really hit home for people who had been pushed to the margins of society. Now, you'd think that the powerful kings of the time would have tried to crush a rebellious movement like this. But here's the twist. Something very different happened. They tried to get in on it.
The powerful Choli kings in the south were incredibly clever politicians. They saw how popular these saints were, and instead of fighting them, they basically co-opted the movement. They built these magnificent temples for Shiva and Vishnu, gave them huge grants of land, and even had the saints' Tamil hymns sung in the temples. By embracing the Bhakti movement, they were able to use its popularity to strengthen their own power and legitimacy.
But of course, all these changes weren't happening in a vacuum. During this same period, Islam was arriving and establishing itself on the subcontinent, and that led to new interactions, new complexities, and brand new fusions of faith and culture.
So, with the arrival of Muslim rulers, a new legal system for non-Muslims came into play. The idea of the zimmi, which means protected person, was extended to Hindus. Basically, the deal was this. You pay a tax called the jizya, and in return, the state guarantees your protection and gives you the freedom to practice your own religion.
And the reality of this protection might actually surprise you. This here is an official order from the Mughal Emperor Akbar, all the way back in 1598. He is telling his officials in no uncertain terms not to interfere with Christian priests who want to build a church in Gujarat, and to make sure they can worship freely.
Okay, this one might be even more surprising. This is a letter from the Emperor Aurangzeb, who is often painted as this really rigid hardliner, writing to a Hindu holy man. And just listen to the way he talks. May your reverence remain in peace under the protection of Sri Shiv Jio. He's showing incredible respect and even offers to help him out. It just shows a much more complicated and nuanced picture of how these faiths interacted than we often hear about.
And this blending of cultures wasn't just happening at the top, in the royal courts. On the ground, it was even more profound. Take a look at this 13th century mosque in Kerala. Its architecture looks a lot like the local temples, right? That's because the Arab Muslim traders who settled there didn't just bring their faith, they adopted local customs like matrilineal, where you trace your family through your mother, and they used the local language and building styles. It created this amazing, unique blend of the universal and the local.
So, what's the big takeaway from this incredible 1,000-year journey? Well, it wasn't a simple story of one faith replacing another. It was a messy, creative story of challenge, of dialogue, and of fusion. It was a revolution fought not with swords, but with songs of devotion and razor-sharp poems. And it leaves us with a pretty big question. How do these complex, ancient conversations between rebels, saints, and rulers continue to echo and shape the world we all live in today?